Hey guys, Matt Moreland here. Today I'm going to talk to you about the pros and cons of starting your own Airbnb or short-term rental in 2021. Now, let's get right into it with the pros. The first pro is that there's potential for more income than on a long-term rental. Let's use a specific example. So on a property of ours that was formerly a single-family rental, rented out for 12 months at a time, that and identical properties in the neighborhood we're renting out for $1,400 a month or so. But once it was converted over to a short-term rental, on a monthly basis, it was bringing in anywhere from $2,500 to $3,200 a month. Now, if that doesn't sound like a huge increase at first, especially considering the cost to start it up, think about that in terms of a year and how quickly that pays itself off and begins putting more cash in your pocket. Just because of the cash flow and income potential that short-term rentals provide, it's definitely something that you should consider if you're struggling to break even or produce cash flow on any of your rental properties. The second pro is that it's fun to operate and it can be fun to set up as well. So even within the short-term rental community, there's some challenges that go on, like to see who can get a Airbnb completely set up for the least amount of money, or sometimes it even gets creative, like seeing how few different stores you can go to, or there's a one-store challenge, which is you have to set up and furnish your entire Airbnb, but you can only go to one store. A lot of times it's somewhere like Costco or Sam's Club. Once you're up and operating, you're going to meet some really interesting characters from all over the place. We've had people from all over the world stay at our Airbnb in Lubbock, Texas, and we've gotten to meet some cool people and hear some awesome stories. The third pro is that you don't actually have to own any real estate in order to start your own Airbnb or short-term rental business. And this is something called rental arbitrage, which is something we can talk about in a future video if it's something you want to hear about, but otherwise I'll keep it brief. In short, what rental arbitrage is renting a property from a landlord, making sure they're okay with this first, of course, then furnishing it and turning it around and putting it on short-term rental platforms so that you get the benefits of having a short-term rental without the cost upfront of purchasing the real estate yourself. The fourth pro is you get a potentially paid for vacation spot or guest house. So this depends on where you're purchasing it and where you live as well. So if you're buying it somewhere that's a vacation destination and it's out of state for you or out of your area, you're having it paid for by all of your guests coming through and paying for the operations and putting cash flow in your pocket. But you're also having a place where you can block out a week or two every year, or maybe a few times a year, and go and have a vacation with no lodging costs because those short-term rental guests are paying for you to own that property. If the Airbnb you have is close by, you essentially have a free guest house for friends, family, people who come in town. As long as it's vacant and as long as it's vacant when it needs to be occupied by your guests who are in town, it's pretty much paid for by the rest of the guests throughout the year. And so you can put your friends, family, relatives who are in town up in your Airbnb for no cost. So they're not having to pay for a hotel while they're in town. And it's really great, especially if you have a lot of kids and don't have room for a ton of family at your place. So let's get into the cons. It's gonna sound like I'm ragging on short-term rentals, but that's not the case at all. It's definitely a unique situation for everyone, so weigh the pros and cons for you and what makes the most sense. But I am a huge proponent of short-term rentals and Airbnbs. So these are just the cons that I could think of off the top of my head and that I thought I'd share with you because they are pretty much applicable to most hosts. The first con is that they can cost a lot of money up front. And when I say that, I mean they can cost a lot of money, more than a long-term rental like a traditional property would. So not only are you buying the property if you're purchasing it or if you're doing rental arbitrage, whatever, but you're also having to furnish the property completely. So not only are you putting beds, furniture, plates, dishes, things like that in there, but you got to think about things like towels, soap, dryer sheets, everything from floor to ceiling. You're furnishing this place and that can add up quickly. I don't know what the average is, but for ours, I mean, we've been able to furnish stuff anywhere between $6,000 and $10,000 for about 1,500 to 1,800 square feet. So it gets costly, and saving money wherever you can is going to pay off in the long run. So it's something to consider. You need to have some money set aside. That way you can fully furnish it, and you're not putting some to market that's not ready for guests to stay in. So the second con is nightmare guests. This is something that every Airbnb host is going to have at some point or another, but it's better to prepare yourself early on. That way when it does happen, you know what to do and how to handle it. We've had everything from guests shoving towels down all the toilets and flooding a property to someone trying to grill in a closed garage. So nothing really surprises you anymore after you've been hosting for a few years, but it can be kind of frustrating when you get a call from the neighbors that, hey, yeah, there's smoke coming out of the garage, or there's water gushing out into our backyard next door from the house. That doesn't seem good. This is just part of hosting on Airbnb sometimes, and another reason why it's very important to read reviews on guests before approving their stay. Not to scare you too much, but if you can get your property booked up by guests who have a bunch of 5-star reviews, 4-star reviews from other hosts, you're usually going to be in good shape. So the third con is somewhat subjective, and it's that short-term rentals cause more headaches than long-term rentals. What do I mean by this? Well, going back on the last one about the nightmare guests, you don't really see as much of that with long-term rentals, but with short-term rentals, it's a lot more common to have crazy things happen. And usually they don't happen like in the middle of the day or after you get off work. They're happening between the hours of like 9 or 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. So you just kind of have to be on your toes and ready for whatever comes your way with short-term rentals, because they can be a roller coaster. So the final con is cleaning the property, especially if you're doing it yourself. I highly recommend outsourcing this to someone who's a lot more efficient and faster than you are. But if you are doing it yourself, it can be a highly time-consuming process. Making sure you have plenty of supplies, materials, you're getting all the laundry done, the bedding, the towels, everything turned and ready in time before the next guest gets there. It can be hard to balance, especially if you're working full-time. So typically check-in times will be about 3 p.m. for us, and check-out times are at noon. So if you're working a full-time job from 8 to 5:30 and you have a checkout at 12 and a check-in at 3, and during that window of time you have to go over there, take off all the bedding, get it washed or put new bedding on, take out all the towels, wash them, hang up new towels, clean the whole property from top to bottom, especially during quarantine when stricter regulations were put in place. It's going to be hard to do that while you're still working your job. So outsourcing that to someone who's a lot better than you are, it seems like it may cost a lot at first, but it's going to save you a whole lot more in terms of time and money in the long run. Find a good cleaning crew and pay them well, because you want to keep them around and treat them well so that they keep helping you run your business effectively. I really appreciate you hitting that subscribe button and like button below to help the YouTube algorithm and get this in front of more people. If this is the kind of content that you guys like from me, please let me know in the comments below so I know to make more of it, or if I should be making something else. As always, thank you all for watching.